the controlling class is not interested in having people understand this because, first of all, this leads to the causal factors, the understanding of the causal factors about why humanity is in the current conditions that we're in. Many people will have no answer for that. They don't understand the causal factors.
Tonight on History So It Doesn't Repeat.
Welcome back to History So It Doesn't Repeat. Tonight we have a very special topical debate between Tom Wilcuts of Hartford, Connecticut. He's a local attorney, and the illustrious Larken Rose here on Skype for the first time in the studio. Welcome, Larken. Welcome, Tom.
I could predict what might happen. I could suggest what I think would happen. First of all, in your example, the arbitration company that did that never gets another customer, and they're finished.
You're absolutely 100% wrong about that, Larken. And that's not even a point of debate. Okay, those arbitrations.
Really? You think people would voluntarily go to an arbitration company if they had a choice? Not a government forcing them to do it, that had been caught totally cooking the books and rigging something in favor of
I think the muddiness is you don't find that out. Like you agree to the arbitrator in the initial contract, and then later you find out that arbitrator is rotten. So you don't have that information up front when you're making that contract.
Yeah, so I would get ripped off, and that arbitration company is doomed.
They are.
Because everybody else in the future would say, I'm not going to them to arbitrate.
Why?
They're total crap.
Why would they not go?
Because they have a choice.
Wait a minute.
Every government court system, including yours, where you just said they won't have a choice. They will have to go to your government authoritarian court system, even if it's
wait a minute, Larry. Let's stick to your hypothetical, okay? You, Larken Rose, got ripped off by an arbitration system, right?
Right.
Now, because you, Larken Rose, got ripped off, everyone else and the territorial United States is not going to use that arbitration system. Tell me how that comes about. First of all,
paying attention. Have you ever heard of Consumer Reports?
No.
What do? They go out and say,
Larken,
we looked at this product. This one sucks. This one
First of all, how does anybody else other than you know what happened in that arbitration?
Because I say what happened.
Oh, and how do you get that out there? Do you appear on CBS?
That's why I just said Consumer Reports. They make a lot of money telling people objectively what they think of certain products. And if they get caught taking $1 from somebody pushing a product, they're finished. Because their entire job is to report to the public who's trustworthy and who's not. And you would totally have that when it comes to arbitration, even if, you wouldn't even need the word of mouth thing.
Government's forced.
And you know it. As a lawyer, they force, and you have to be a licensed arbitration company, which means the government approves of you. And the entire court system is forced on people. If a corporation stomps on you, you take them to court. By the way, it's going to cost you this much to go to court, and you're going to have to hire a lawyer and pay him $12 gajillion.
Anybody can choose arbitration right now with anybody.
They can do it voluntarily, and often courts.
And by the way, you don't have to be licensed to be an arbitrator. I could agree that you would be my arbitrator.
Well, not privately.
What?
I mean, two people can say, let's have him decide this dispute.
No. Let me make this clear, Larken. In terms of contract clauses, okay, let me tell you one of the most protected contract clauses that exists in the law today, and that is an agreement to arbitrate. You cannot challenge that in any fashion. The courts will enforce those across the board. You can claim that it was unfair. You can claim that you didn't realize what you were agreeing to.
Okay, so that's the point right there. That you would sign a contract. Let's say we all signed a contract with Facebook on day one, and it says arbitrate, blah, 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 with this company. 5 years from now, we find out that we have to arbitrate. We find out that company is rotten, and every other billion people on the planet that are up with Facebook are also signed on that to the arbitration. They signed a contract. That contract's going to be held, even though they were lied to, even though that company's corrupt. The voluntary nature of the status of the interaction is taken away in the contractual obligation, where if you find out after the fact that the arbitration company is rotten, you've already signed the contract and you're obligated to it according to what you were just describing.
No,
And government's supposed to surrender.
well, and I get a little excited about arbitration because I handle cases against Wall Street, and they've managed to put arbitration agreements in all their contracts, and to show how difficult that is. Senator Feingold, I think he's a Harvard Law grad, and he was a U.S. Senator. He walks into a Merrill Lynch office, and he actually is reading the account agreement, and he sees the arbitration clause. He goes, well, I don't want to agree to this. And they say, well, you don't have any choice. He goes, what do you mean I don't have any choice? He goes, if you want to take that arbitration agreement out, you can't open an account with us. And by the way, you couldn't open an account with any other brokerage firm of any size and substance. So Feingold thought that wasn't a very cool thing. So he tried to pass a bill that would prevent that consumers would have the right to not be compelled.
Can they name their own arbitrator?
No, that was sort of my solution, because my solution, arbitration agreements are so protected that it would be very, very difficult to. And if here a U.S. senator, he authored a bill, it got some consideration, couldn't do it. And they tried to include it in the recent Frank Dodd stuff, and they couldn't agree to it. They said, well, we'll have the SEC study it, and if they think it's a good idea.
Well, if I can just interject, from my court case and my interactions with the SEC, I was under the belief that there were authorities, that they were legitimate authorities, and if you took them evidence, they would be forced to act in the public interest. And the reason that I'm sitting in my homemade studio is because that's simply not true. And once you find out you don't have these protections, it makes you start asking some questions, which is how I think we all got here.
Right. Now, when Larkin talked about the bailout, okay, the banking industry is above everything. Okay, it is the most protected. Wall Street is the king. Okay, in the recent economic, the big, huge auto corporations went into bankruptcy, not the banks. They get the money, even though they caused the whole thing. Okay, and the reason they did is because and congressmen stood up and said this on the floors. They could go back there and say, if you don't do this the right way, we can freeze the entire system. We can,
so they've got power, that authority.
Well, Kissinger said, if you control food, you can control people. You control oil, you can control nations. You control money, you control everything. Rothschild is.
And Steve Biko said,
the most potent weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed.
There you go.
Sure, look, we're not disagreeing on that.
And I brought that up, Larkin, because last time Tom was here, he was here with Chengiz Raghavan, who was a mentor to Steve Biko. And so I just wanted to bring that full circle, the mind of the oppressed is the most potent weapon that they have. And back to, Larkin and this most dangerous superstition, this fallacy of the belief that there's an authority beyond logic and reason and existence. Do you want to comment on that, Larkin?
Yeah, see, we got into this particular example of arbitration in courts and disputes and things like that. But the whole, what everybody wants government to be is a big thing that's more powerful than anybody else that'll make sure the good guys win. I mean, and people will disagree with who the good guys are, but that's what everybody wants. And that's what everybody says we need government for. They say, well, bad people would do bad things to you if we didn't have a government to stop that. And they always talk as if government, for some reason, even though it's just made of people, even though we're giving it permission to forcibly control us, it will be on the right side. It will protect us. And then it turns around and stomps on us and robs us and oppresses us way more than the private crooks did. And then it stomps on us on behalf of the private crooks, like the bailout and the Federal Reserve. But the problem, it starts with a good intention. I want the biggest guy on the block to be a good guy, and I want him to be so big and strong, nobody can beat him. So you get this big, huge, strong guy, and then you find out he's not a good guy because we just told him he's allowed to control us and take our money. And that's what government always turns into. Now, on occasion, it will protect some people against other aggressors. Sometimes a cop will stop that bad guy from attacking that innocent person. Great. That doesn't require government. The right of self-defense is perfectly legitimate. You can organize that voluntarily. You can fund it voluntarily. That act doesn't require government. The one that does require government is when the cop says, by the way, you didn't pay your taxes, we're kicking you out of your house. An act of aggression. So all of that, however intricate or simple or basic and whatever the specific issue, arbitration or a guy stealing a car, whatever it is, I'm all for organization and cooperation and formal procedure to make sure you get it right, to make sure you know the facts, a thorough investigation, an unbiased person making the decision so we're clear on what actually happened and what we're going to do about it. None of that requires government. The only thing that requires government is saying that guy is the final decider. That group has rights to do things we don't. It's up to them, because then what happens is we imagine them to be gods. We imagine them to have rights to do things we don't have the right to do. And even the Constitution did that. It was supposed to be limited, but Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. Wow, I don't have the power to lay and collect taxes. Who the heck gave it to them?
Larkin, even if, set aside my experience where, major corporations are able to, they're the ones that we all know, they're the ones that write the contracts. So, and if they put the same arbitration company in hundreds of thousands of contracts, that's where that arbitration company is getting their profits from, okay? But let's set that aside. Let's say that you and I, as ordinary citizens, enter into a honest contract and we write in an honest arbiter to resolve a dispute to our contract. When you do that, you are signing over to that arbitrator authority over you to make a decision that is going to affect your property. Okay?
Except it isn't the same, because it's a voluntary agreement. It's like if I say, I'll sell you my car for however many dollars.
But see, Larkin, my concept of a well-designed government is that it would be voluntary. Okay.
Then it isn't government.
Well, you can say that, but
Well, see, this is why I asked before. I was trying to get to can I just ignore it? Like, does it have a monopoly, or is it just, if it's people voluntarily offering a service, fine.
No,
if I can take it or leave it, I don't care, but that's not government. Because everybody can ignore it, nothing happens.
But Larkin, in your book, okay, you deal with this concept. It's called the social contract theory of government. The idea that the citizens agree to be members of a government. And you say, no, that doesn't work.
Complete bunk. It's not that it doesn't work. It's an utter lie. It never happens.
Well,
we're told you consent to being ruled by falling out of your mother onto this piece of dirt.
But it's not a logical impossibility. Okay, it's the same consent that you give when you enter into a contract to let an arbitrator decide your welfare, your future, your property.
Except that, no, the equivalent would be somebody saying, I want to make a deal with you, and by the way, I get to take your house if anything goes wrong. And by the way, you don't have a choice. You're going to agree to this because your other choice is get out of your house and leave the country.
Look, okay.
Like, you can make voluntary agreements with, one person, a huge company, whatever it is, but government isn't that. Like, the government of a territorial jurisdiction, whether it's a country or a state or a local thing, says, we make up the rules. And if your house, your home that you bought or you built is inside this imaginary line that we said is our jurisdiction, we can change the rules all we want. And if you don't obey, we take your house or we put you in a cage. That's not an agreement. If my choices are which master is going to rule me, I didn't consent to any of it.
First of all, look, I'll agree with you. The United States doesn't fit the social contract ideal. Okay. But that's not, but there may be other governments, I don't know all these.
Well, you're both talking about things that don't exist yet. And the reason they don't exist yet is because there's plunder versus production. because there's people believing things that are not true, and then they, get together and you have groupthink. There's a whole bunch of dynamics. It's really interesting. But, let me just break the tension here for a second. What's the difference between the mafia and government? The mafia doesn't have a 15,000 hour indoctrination system to convince you it's not the mafia. Now, I heard that from Brett Venon. He'd probably credit Stefan, and Stefan would probably credit Larkin. But the idea is that there's a whole indoctrination system set up to make us think that this is all normal and that authority is just there as natural as trees. And authority is something created in the minds of men. It's not part of nature. It's part of an unreality. And part of that unreality that I see driving, the ability for people to be productive is not because of these people who plunder, but rather the people who are plundering are made, wealthy by all these hard working people who take in this idea of authority without resistance at all.
I didn't get past your mafia thing, but anyway. No, I mean, because, mafia has a bad,
I'm not saying anything bad about the mafia at all.
Well, look,
Wouldn't do that.
You had these immigrants coming in. They didn't speak the language, okay? They were shut out. They're basically shut out of the political system.
They're entrepreneurs, in my opinion.
Well, if the government wasn't working for these immigrant peoples that came in, they sort of set up their own government,
right?
Okay? I mean, when you see Don Corleone and Godfather 1,
people being protected,
are coming to him for justice.
And other people needed protection, right?
So it was sort of a government within a government.
It was filling in the gaps where government wasn't covering everybody.
It wasn't automatic.
It was also a lot more honest than government. Because
at least
gangsters.
We use this term government as though, again, if you want to take an example of a bad government, it's just like I'm sure there are a lot of bad mafia gangs, but that doesn't mean they were all bad. Okay, all the time.
Bad is a subjective term.
All right, and the same with government. Okay, we can't,
But it isn't the same, because government, by its nature, is a group of people imagined to have rights that other people don't have. Imagined to have the right to do things that other people don't have. By its very nature, what the term means is a group that has the right to do things that are evil. If I do,
Larkin, we're back to your signing a contract and giving a group of people that power over you. And now, so the real difference is, you say that's okay. So the real difference is it possible for citizens to get together and form an organization that basically accomplishes the same thing? You say, well, it's never happened. Fine. I'm not sure that's true, first of all. Okay. You could find a small town there's that island in the English Channel, the Guernsey or whatever. I don't know if they do it there, or, Liechtenstein.
I'm not saying that never happened. I'm saying it either is voluntary or it's government. It's either moral or it's government. It can't be both. There are plenty of organizations, whether it's 3 people or 1,000, that say, let's all agree to do things this way. And they do, and it's voluntary, and they do it that way.
No, Larkin, you're saying that the social contract theory of government, according to you, can't be a government. Because if it were a government, it would be a good thing. And since you're defining government as a bad thing, by definition, it couldn't be government because it's a good thing.
No, the social contract excuse that's used for government.
Well, I'm not favoring it. I'm not favoring it being used as an excuse. Okay. I mean, if it's a lie and a deception, it's like a contract that's...
Well, that's the only context I've ever heard social contract used is, well, by living on this piece of dirt, you agree to do whatever the masters say and pay tribute to them.
No, you're assuming taxes. Okay, so if you have property, let's say, again, in my state, okay, it has geographical boundaries. You own property. You don't want to be a citizen. You're fully entitled not to be a citizen. You won't have any duties of citizenship. There's a couple of rights that you probably would be missing.
Can I own property and not pay taxes to a school that I feel is corrupt? I don't pay taxes to a government that wages war?
In my nation, there are no coercive taxes.
But again, that's a hypothetical. Why hasn't your nation taken place yet?
Why hasn't anarchy taken place?
I asked. Well, I could answer.
Or
go ahead, Larkin. Larkin's the guest.
Voluntarism society,
Because people hallucinate the thing called authority. Like, as long as they imagine there is such a thing, they're going to keep fabricating
Well, there's
one and putting
another
somebody on the throne.
possibility there, Larkin. Okay, which is that a societal setup or organization that can't efficiently compete with others is just not gonna survive. It's gonna, whatever take the Marxist ideal. I mean, even if their society, even if their organization weren't corruptible the way it was and became they had a good plan and idea. They wanted to get rid of certain oppression. And even if they had succeeded in getting rid of that oppression without replacing it with a new oppression, they were going to be, by competition, they were going to go out of existence, okay? So that's another problem you have with your society. Trust me, your society, if you had a state, if you had a geographical area of volunteer, if you had a volunteerist...
Trust them.
If you had a volunteerist...
when a lawyer says trust me, I just had this whole idea in my head.
You have, so many square miles in a block to the east, and I have the same to the west. You have your volunteer society, I have society I would design. People would leave yours and come to mine, okay? So
I can't wait to visit both.
We wouldn't try to stop them.
Yeah.
We would be all for it. But see, you're missing the fundamental thing. You're talking as if these are two ways to organize. Like we're having two football teams. One's going to have a captain who decides the plays, and the other is going to democratically choose which plays to do. You're talking as if there are two ways to organize humanity. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people today hallucinate the possibility that one human being can acquire the right to rule another. When they understand that that is not possible, not just that it's destructive and can be abused and has murdered several 100 million human beings, but that the idea itself is insane.
Hey, by the way,
once they understand that, there won't be there can still be crooks, there can still be bullies, but nobody will imagine them to have the right to do that, which means society as a whole will naturally try to resist it and fight against it.
You don't have the organizational power to do that.
You don't need that. See, that's a perfect example. You don't need organizational power to not believe in Santa Claus. You don't need a giant movement to not believe in Santa Claus. You don't need, we got to get together and really form, there isn't a Santa Claus organization. When people give up the belief in government and recognize it as being just as insane, only way more destructive, as the belief in Santa Claus, you don't have to do something to make society. Then you have free human beings, and free human beings decide what to do. All the belief in authority is this mutant mental psychosis that is viciously twisting humanity and causing mass extortion and constant warmongering and violence because people imagine that political processes can make evil into good. When they stop believing that, then people will be free to arrange in ways that are actually sane and moral. As long as they believe in government, they're going to keep organizing in ways that are inherently destructive and insane.
As long as people keep believing in
is.
Santa Claus, they're going to continue celebrating Christmas and waiting for the reindeer. Santa is an unreality. One of the problems I notice is that people believe things that aren't true. This idea of authority, whatever you call it, is irrational. I'm not talking about experts. I'm not talking about going to someone who knows the craft or trade better than you. I'm talking about someone who claims that they can tax you, they can rule you, they can tell you where you can't move, what lines you can't cross. And go ahead.
And Rich, when you sign a contract, you give
I signed no contract
when
to be
you
a state,
sign a contract, you give people that authority.
Sure.
But you don't. You don't.
But when I go to a different town,
you don't say, I hereby agree that you get to run my life. You agree to, I will do this if you do that. Very simple
if you sign
agreement.
And I've read.
If you sign a contract that says you're allowed to rule me and tell me what to do and take as much money as I want, you're an idiot.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what Stefan Kinsella, a legal scholar on anarchy, what Rothbard, what Hoppe, these guys say that in their stateless society, you sign a contract. The contract includes a dispute resolution. You are giving to that dispute resolution company authority
I have no argument over that. My argument is I was born into this country. I was subject to all sorts of laws, taxes, all these sort of things. Everyone around me was. And so it took many years to even discover that that system existed, because it's like air. It's like fish in water. You don't know, the fish wouldn't know about water until you took it out of the water, right? So you don't understand that taxes are a form of human resource harness, just like anything else that we've been talking about through this discussion. So I just want to bring it toward, tying up all these loose ends. Larkin, your videos, the Tiny Dot and If I Were King, the only things that I recall thinking, critically beyond agreeing with most of what you said was the reason that all those dots have not, the reason that hasn't happened yet, that the desirable end result where people realize that they don't need authority, is because that there's a lack of connectivity in media and communication of a cogent, rational variety among those tiny dots. And that's what you're saying. There's too many of those tiny dots that haven't got the message of a dangerous superstition and just adopting anything without thinking about it. Holding a belief is like stopping at a rest stop and not the destination. You should be continuing to gather evidence, to observe, to define, and that's how you arrive at knowledge and make informed decisions. So I would think that a lot of those things weren't done before any of us signed up to selective service or Social Security or, any of these other things that we all kind of have to participate in. And it's the thousand strings that tie Gulliver down, if I might use a metaphor.
Yeah, and in the Tiny Dot, I intentionally don't explain it and I don't resolve it. I just leave it, oh, well, like here's this huge throng obeying this little
Well,
dot.
I think that's what we're doing now.
To see how many people can try to explain it. It's totally what
I
we
like
are now.
the Tiny Dot video. I thought that was good.
It was awesome.
And the things we agree on, another thing we agree on, Larkin, is I agree that you have no compulsion to follow a law that you find morally repugnant. Okay? I got to tell you, this goes at a young age. I would guess I was a less deferential authority than probably you are, and I've always been that way. Okay, to me, that's just not part of my constitution. But what I would say is that the people, people and lands and cultures who've been dominated by the West, right? Okay. I would suggest that the reason the West has been able to do what it's done is mainly due to organizational advantages. The Islamic countries, the Far East countries, they're doing well in science and technology and a lot of things compared to the West. When the West developed the corporate organizational structure and certain features of their governmental structures, that's when they flew by. Okay? You can't turn back the clock on human evolution when it comes to advancements in organization. All you can do is try to use those organizational tools to,
to do it wisely, you have to ask the question, what does this new technology give and what does it take away? And is what it's taking away part of our core values, our needs to survive? And I think a lot of those decisions have been made over the decades in the past century that people didn't ask those questions. They just assumed that if Eisenhower was telling them to do it and he's on TV, that's a good thing to do. And I like Ike, right? So
one thing I would object to is this notion that, government organization was evolving, and it went from predominantly monarchies to this representative notion. All right, it's relatively new. All right, in the whole scheme of things, the American Constitution, they didn't know what was going to happen. There was competing forces. They fought. They compromised. Now we have the experience. I think you have a roadmap to where you can learn from that and try to fix it. So, and I understand we disagree about that, Larkin, and that's, I think, why we have
Well, and I think some
tonight.
of the disagreement's inherent in the Constitution because there's some first principles that were assumed, and then you have the Bill of Rights. And instead of reasoning from that which exists, which everyone has to experience, and that's why we have needs to survive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they made some assumptions, and now people can say the starting point isn't existence. It's not that which exists. It could be authority. It could be, a religious authority, political authority. Go ahead, Larkin.
The problem is that most of us haven't learned the one thing to learn. If the Constitution should have taught us anything by taking the most limited government in the history of the world and building the most powerful authoritarian empire in history, it's the one ingredient that you have to leave out of it is authority and government. The idea that we need forcible organization. Government is not an organizational tool. It is a violent domination tool.
I understand that.
We need a servant
Organization-
tool, not a domination
Listen,
tool.
I understand that theory, but you need to understand that there is substantial
It's not a theory. It's the nature of the thing.
well, there's substantial scholarship out there to the effect that by not providing for control of the currency, that you basically open the door to turn the government into a puppet tool. Okay? And so if that's
you can't have a government being a puppet tool if there isn't a government.
well, okay, you can't kill someone with a gun without a gun.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, so
You can use a gun purely defensively. You cannot use a government purely defensively, or it isn't government.
look.
If it doesn't claim to have rights that I don't have, it isn't authority. It's
Let me
just
ask a
group of
question.
Guys.
Since what we have are a bunch of people who don't act as the servant of the people, you have a government that's made up of individuals who are abusing that power. If we didn't have payment to those people, if they were on a voluntary basis voted, held to certain strict adherence to logic and reason and non-aggression, which is it's a derivative proof of that which exists, and it's not doing anything involuntary, you might not want to call it the government, but you could still have people at the service of everyone else to get these same things done and not have what comes with it, this authority. No, they're not an authority. They're a servant of the people. And if governments were created to serve and protect these rights, I certainly, there's a little bit of a circular reasoning there, because if you could protect your own rights, you wouldn't need this other group of people to fight the king, right?
That's the only ingredient that needs to be removed. Authority. You can have an organization, you can have defense, you can have, and a lot of what you're describing, I'm all for it. It's when you finally got to the point of saying it's allowed to do this and you're not, that it remained government and remained destructive.
You guys are really close. You're really close. There's a little bit of difference there.
Except that that one step is really dang
Is it
important,
meaningful, Larkin?
because the choice is either I own myself or somebody else is my master.
Now, what if you...
And there isn't an in-between.
If you don't own yourself and you don't own the means of your production and you're on welfare of the state and you're taken care of, I mean, what does that mean to you?
I'm not even a person anymore.
Right.
Yeah, but so, Larkin,
That's human resource.
in
You
my
don't wanna be
nation, you can opt out of being a citizen. No one's going to require you to be a citizen.
Okay, but you still think it has rights to do certain things, not very many
Well,
things.
the same,
thankfully.
but there are no rights that you don't recognize anyway. You recognize. I haven't heard an anarchist yet who does not. I mean, the anarchists. I mean, they say we're not a pacifist idealism. What we are is, so we believe in they believe in criminal punishment. Okay, I mean, what was it? So when I hear these PDAs described, private defense associations, not only can they wield weapons and use deadly force, they can operate. The idea is they will operate prisons too. Okay, so you're going to have privately run prison systems.
So says you.
No. That's just.
First of all, don't make me try to defend what somebody else.
Well, you were always making me defend bad government, so why shouldn't I make you defend?
But you're defending the concept of authority. You're making up what other people say they would do in the
But it's the
absence of the
same
state, and
authority.
you defend
It's the
it.
same authority that you grant when you enter into a contract.
But that's voluntary.
Except,
But that's my government's voluntary.
if I agree with some
Yeah,
arrangement
all right.
and sign an arbitration clause, I'm saying in that little context, like if I'm hiring you to do a service and if something goes wrong, we'll go to this. I'm not saying I agree that you are my rightful lord and master. I will do anything you say.
I'm not agreeing.
There's a pretty big fundamental
My
difference.
government
in
doesn't
saying-
have
Okay, so the
either.
chasm, the difference is you're talking about your own
I think you
unique
just said
brand.
he was a little bit
I know,
pregnant,
but you're
but
talking about
anyway.
your unique brand of government that you've thought up, and we're talking about that which exists kind of now, and it's I just
ahead.
wanted to make sure that you understand that there was a little gap there, because when I made this comment to you, you're like, well, I'm talking about my form of government. I only heard a couple of those steps, and I wanted to make sure, because I'm actually dealing with reality and not the hypotheticals. I'm trying to bridge the gap to figure out what could be created to resolve these problems, as opposed to, sending another 10 generations through this country who don't have a clue about self-reliance or that which exists. And, my cup is a cup, and I can't make this into gold because of the law of existence.
Right.
Like, that's cause and effect.
So, Rich, one of the biggest objections to anarchists is they don't live in the real world.
I'm not an anarchist, so go ahead. Tell me about
the
it.
Anarcho-capitalist. I mean, one of
An
these
elitist, Godwin made up anarchy, so I'm not part of that group.
Walter Block is
I'm an
a
individual.
professor anarchist.
Go ahead.
Okay, and so he made this I was listening to him give a talk. He made this self-effacing joke. He goes, so you got a physicist, a chemist, and an economist, since they think the free market's going to solve everything.
Sure.
And
I could throw in a quantum physicist like Galambos from Princeton and his.
Anyway, the problem they have to solve is to open a can of stew, because they're like shipwrecked and it's food, and the chemist, the physicist wants to drop it from a certain height. The chemist wants to apply heat to it, whatever.
Sure.
And the economist says, let's imagine a can opener. Okay. This
And
is
the
sort of the
polymath opened it for them while they were all doing that. So let's get back to the issue at hand,
Right.
the unreality. Go ahead, Larkin.
Talking about living in the real world.
Sure.
Can I take you through 3 really quick, really simple, really basic lines of questioning to prove that authority does not and cannot exist?
I couldn't believe you didn't do that in the first 5
Please
minutes.
do.
I was
Let's
so
do it.
waiting for this.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do it the whole time, and our conversation flies in lots of
Okay,
interesting
sure.
directions. Can you delegate to another human being a right you don't have?
No.
Can 2 people delegate a right to another human being that neither of them have?
No.
Can 1 billion people delegate to another person a right that none of those billion people have?
No.
Can anybody in government ever have any right that I don't have?
By agreement, yeah.
Whose agreement?
Who agreed to give them a right that none of us had to begin with?
By again, the social contract theory of government.
When I got here, there were nuclear weapons. I didn't agree to that. I have no say.
Right. If
over
you
it.
want to talk about a bad government, I can tell you some problems with.
It's not about a bad government. It's about people cannot give to somebody else rights they don't have, which means people in Congress do not and cannot, in this Congress, in your Congress, in any government,
on the planet,
literally can't have a right that I don't have.
right? I mean, that's why.
you know.
That's why we're talking about this, and I built a studio, because there's no country on the planet that I could really move to and get this good type of government, because all these different places seem to be run by a gangster cult already. So it's just, I'm trying to work it forward.
But wait,
Go ahead.
But let's quick do the other 2. I think you actually already did one. Can you ever be obligated to do what you think is wrong? If an authority tells you do this and you think it's bad, can you have a moral obligation?
Well,
you might do it out of self-preservation.
It's a question of degree, Lark. I mean, you mentioned the football team, okay? So let's think, I'm a player, and I think, the rule that you can't, one of your teammates can't push the ball carrier over the goal line is a dumb rule, okay? And it's stupid, and I argue against it or whatever, but it's a rule that, if you're playing the game, you got to play by a set of rules. So that's true of a lot of laws. Now, but
you agree that you got to play by, you think the right thing to do. You think the rule is dumb, but you think the right thing to do is play by the rule because the game doesn't work.
There are certain things that you need that it's valuable to have a set of rules. That in certain activities, without a set of rules, you're not going to be able to do well. Now, to answer your question, though.
You're wandering away from a
To answer
very
your
simple
question, if you
concept.
have a fundamentally immoral law, okay, I mean, where you're talking about doing something, that violates fundamental rights or something on that order, then no, you absolutely don't.
Okay, good. And yeah, you basically said that before. The reason that makes the concept of authority explode is what it boils down to is you, Mr. Government, have the right to rule me in certain ways unless I decide that you don't. And that makes the notion of a rightful ruler just go poof. And the thing is, everybody believes that. Everybody, I can find an example where they say, well, in that case, you should break the law. Well, what you're saying is I, this human being, should obey the authority until I decide I shouldn't. Well, that means you're above it. It's not your master anymore. Just stay above it. Don't jump down below it and pretend you have an obligation to obey. Do what you think is right instead of what the master's telling you.
Larkin,
Milgram experiment.
No. So here, here's the example. Okay, again, you enter your contract. You agree to a dispute resolution. You are, and this actually happens. Okay, in this dispute resolution, you are right. The other person's wrong. He lies, and the person believes them. And therefore you, by your contract, have the decision to wrongfully give up your property or not. Okay? And,
yeah, but there's no, whatever I decide, I may think, well, it's not worth fighting because they're going to win anyway. Or I may think, no, I'm going to resist this. Whatever I decide, like
you agree to be bound by something that is unjust. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm saying whichever direction I go in, I can never think, you know what I should do? I should do what I shouldn't do. And that's what the belief in authority requires. It requires believing I should do what he says I should do, even when I think I should.
No. Look, let me tell you something, okay? So the other person on the other side of the contract lied, but he won because the arbitrator believed him. It's an unjust result. You now have the decision. You could decide, depending on the circumstances and the gravitas, you could decide, I'm going to resist this. Okay, and there's a moral argument that you would be right. Okay, so that's a choice that you make. When a government becomes, this is what the colonists did, and this is what the Declaration of Independence says. It says if a government reaches a point, you can reject it. So that notion of rejection,
can we still reject it in this country? Because I think they take you off to a prison.
I think Jefferson would say you could. They were prepared to take the colonists. We're going to swing. We're going to swing. We're going to swing together or swing separately or whatever. Yeah. We're going to hang together. Okay.
The thing is, that clause was a giant contradiction. That was the good part, where they said, "Hey, if it becomes
the point is,
individual rights,
it's not you're not. Let me tell you, you're not going to be able. What you want to do." And I majored in, I have a degree in philosophy. I went through the logic courses.
Don't bring your fallacy of authority
You want to construct, I read your stuff, I heard you. You want to construct a logical proof, okay? You can't do it. I mean,
yes, I can.
Look, John Locke was not, he didn't miss some fundamental mistake.
Oh yeah, he's got a lot of dogma.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of dogma. I agree with.
He missed the biggest mistake in the history of mankind.
All right, well listen, you can have that opinion, but I can tell
that's the next debate. Is about Locke.
If you tried to construct a logical proof. Too bad. I'm imagining he's looking at me.
I just did too. If people can't delegate rights they don't have, people in government can't have rights I don't have, which means they're not authority. The end.
Okay.
His terms are clear, his premises are true, and therefore his argument seems to be valid. What do you find a fallacy in it?
Because it's the same as his contract. He's giving authority to an arbitration system. Okay.
No, I'm not.
When you sign a contract
I didn't. You made up that example of if that happened. That never happened.
Right, but
I didn't agree to have anybody rule me at all ever. Who else in the world? If everyone else in the world wanted to give to Congress the right to steal my money, could they do it? When none of those people have the right?
People could come together and agree to be taxed. I wouldn't.
I didn't. That's not what I asked.
Fine. Right. That's fine.
7 billion people, do they have the right to agree to take my money when I didn't agree?
I would say, here's what I think. Okay,
that's a one-word answer. Yes or no?
I think no person should be compelled to be a member of any government. Okay.
So, why don't you answer the question? It's not a complicated question. You can elaborate afterwards all you want. Can 7 billion people give the right to steal my stuff to another human being?
Don't
Yes
appeal
or
to
no?
laughter.
I think I already answered that question before.
Is it yes or
Well,
no?
it's only yes or no. Saying yes or no is shorter than saying I think I already answered that before. So can we have a yes or no? Can 7 billion people
No,
give somebody the right to rob me?
No.
And that's what a constitutional republic was supposed to be, that 99% couldn't take away the rights of the one person here out of the 100, right?
Except Congress shall have
Oh,
the
sure,
power
of
to
course,
levy
yeah.
taxes. Whoops.
Yeah, it's word magic. I mean, the Constitution and
spell.
Declaration are definitely spelling. It's the uses of linguistic architecture to frame out a constitution, if you will, a body that can be occupied. But that's another future debate. So I think we've had a really good exchange of initial ideas, and we found more that we agree on than we disagree on thus far. Tom, would you want to make? I'll give you guys like each 5 minutes to make a closing statement, and then I would move to have a future conversation where, after we've mulled over what's been said and what's left on the table, that we can pick up some of the unanswered questions and move the ball forward. Does that sound amicable?
Sounds fun.
Okay, sure. You want me to go first?
Yeah, I can cut. I can. I can cut to you looking smart or something.
Yeah. So, again, man is by his very nature a social creature. Okay, and as a consequence, social organizations have evolved, and the ones that were effective, lasted. The ones that were not, went by the wayside, and so it's evolved to the point where, I guess one of the main points I would make is that a lot of the protections that government could provide, like the protections that the nobles got in the Magna Carta, and that the wealthy American aristocrats and nobles, if you want, got in the Constitution and so forth. These protections can be effective if they're both designed, if they're designed to protect a certain class of people. All right, the jury system is one of the few systems that actually works for the little guy. All right, I mean, it absolutely. I have direct experience with this. I have gone up against the largest corporations in the world. Okay, and if I can get in front of honest jurors, their power, in that case, they can lose because, it's not a elected body. It's not a big arbitration system that caters to corporate interests, large corporate interests, and that's where they make their money. It is a functioning protection by the people for the people. Okay, so I will concede that a lot of these, I mean, you look at Magna Carta. I mean, Larkin and a lot of the anarchist commentators. I mean, their major focus is a government taxes, that's theft. Okay, so the nobles felt that way when it came to the king, and they stood up and they said, "No, you can't do this." Now that, unlike the jury protection that they also got, that then passed on to the people, that one didn't, because the nobles became the king went away and they became the government. So they didn't mind taxing because they were the one doing the taxing.
The document was an end result to memorialize the fact that the barons formed a gang, an effective gang, and didn't they kidnap the king? And
well, the barons were able to design a protection within government to protect themselves from plunder by taxes. So and they designed a protection to protect themselves against arbitrary justice. Now, they try to say that these protections flow to the people. The jury system did. The protection against taxation didn't. Okay, and one of the things that people, I don't think, recognize about what happened in colonial America when they revolted is that one of the things the history books don't write up is that there wasn't a lot of gold and silver. I mean, the only gold and silver was stolen from the Spanish ships and brought over, it was traded for goods in Cuba or something like that. Okay. And it would make its way to the colonies. It would soon go back to England. because they got all, so they came up with their own currencies. And
like nails were embargoed by the empire, and people would sit by the fire and make their own nails. So that's a good example.
And by going with their own currency, they actually created prosperity. And the British government, that's when the Bank of England was like asserting its power, and that was privately held. Okay, and so that's one of the background reasons. And unfortunately, that's one of the things they rebelled against, but they didn't then create the same protection themselves. So in any case, you can design the protections. And unfortunately, they're too often designed for the elite. All right. But that's not to say that you can't design it for the people. And the problem is, if you don't give the people that organizational ability to resist organizational power, whether it's, the East India Company or Halliburton or, the major defense contractors, these aren't going away if you eliminate the state. In my experience, representing the little guy against corporate interests, I don't know what chance they have. Okay. So it's proven to work when it's designed to work for a class of people. We just have to design it to work for the right
We
class.
just have to be that class of people for whom it works.
That's right.
All right. Great. Okay, Larkin, go ahead and close it out. And if you don't mind plugging your website or your books at the end, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, I almost had to bite my tongue
I know.
off.
I saw you, dude.
I
was like, here's a guy who's seen a jury.
As a great protection. 12 complete imbeciles stuck me in a cage for a year for not sending a piece of paper to the federal extortion racket. And the only reason they did it is because they believed in authority. Because an authority figure said, I didn't do what I was supposed to. They didn't say I had hurt anybody. They didn't say I had threatened anybody. They didn't say I had harmed anybody anywhere ever, because I hadn't. They said he didn't do what the masters told him, and they said guilty. Juries are no protection against anything if they believe in authority.
But Mark, would you have the passion you have if that didn't happen, though?
Of course you
Yeah, because I already did.
Okay.
I probably wouldn't be quite as annoyed, maybe. Might not be quite as rude, but I was already an anarchist before any of that happened. Okay, so just as an aside, no faith in juries as long as they believe in authority. Now, as for protection and organization and, we're a social creature. I'm not saying everybody run for the hills, every man for himself. Organization doesn't require special authority, doesn't require a ruling class. Defense doesn't require special authority. Nothing inherently moral requires legislation to make it moral. I mean, that's sort of a truism. Defending yourself against fraud and attackers and all the nasty things that can be done, all the forms that fraud and force and violence and aggression can take, defending yourself in an organized way, cooperating, it can be formal, it can have all these procedures. All of that's good. All of it is inherently moral, and so it doesn't require authority. The only thing that authority adds to the mix is the idea that there are some people with certain exemptions from morality. That's all government is the group imagined to have certain exemptions from the rules that apply to everybody else. But as long as you keep that element of there's going to be an authority that has certain powers that normal people don't, you're keeping an element of there are going to be certain people that are allowed to do evil stuff that's bad if I do it, stuff that's bad if you do it. That is the belief that has to go. We can have cooperation, we can have society, we can have defense, we can have justice, we can have all these formal procedures, but until the lie called authority is gone, there will always be violent aggression, and not just because there are nasty people, but because there are billions of people that hallucinate legitimacy to evil when it's committed in the name of authority. When the people stop imagining that law can make evil into good, then we can start being human beings.
Well, I think what he's really saying is that when you have this belief in something that doesn't exist, this irrational belief of authority that someone can do something that you can't, and it's all good because they have a costume on, That's really pointing toward a trend that has brought us through thousands of years of history and has not yet been effectively resolved. And the hypotheses that I've heard weighed in tonight from each of you are substantial, they're relevant. I don't know that either one is, fit for reality. They might be a little too utopic in some area, but I haven't found those areas yet with what Larkin's saying, because there is a logical proof that existence exists. You have certain inherent rights, and the derivative of that is non-aggression. So giving other people rights that you don't have, to tax people, to plunder their production, it seems something that exists because people continue to believe things that aren't true. And what he's saying is the resistance in people's minds are turned off when they think authority is okay and that it's logical and reasonable. And that if only people had a common point of existence and reference where they could say cause and effect exists and everything else that follows, then they would say, well, it's logical to resist someone who's trying to have authority or dominance over you in such a way that you don't agree to it.
That's exactly what the American Revolution was.
Right, exactly.
And see, some of it.
Some of it.
And see, but that's the problem. If evil were only committed by genuinely evil people, we'd be in a lot better shape. But today, literally almost everybody I know advocates that I be forcibly robbed because they imagine that when such robbery is called taxation and done by authority, it's legitimate. Right now, you literally have almost everybody on the planet, except anarchists and voluntarists, advocating the initiation of violence against their fellow man because they imagine that government and law makes that into a good thing. In other words, the good people condone evil because they don't recognize it as evil because they believe the lie of authority. When they recognize it as evil, then they'll try to stop it instead of voting for it and demanding Congress give them free stuff.
I got to tell you,
that belief has to change.
The same problem exists in corporations, okay? You'll find, you could be neighbors with someone who seems like a completely nice and whatever, and they could belong to a corporation where it's just expected, or their culture, or, the authority of their employers that they do things that they would never do on their own. So that's the problem. You can create these organizations which are capable of doing these things. And we know, so then the question becomes, when you have these types of organizations that do this, how can the average person resist them? And
it comes back to individual self-defense. I understand.
Basically, the anarchist in a nutshell thinks the free market can do this. Okay?
Why doesn't the free market exist now?
I think the free market is what there is. Government is a lie.
Larkin, look, those are definitional. That's not an empirical claim. That's a definitional claim. Okay, you're defining something.
It's easy to prove. It's hard to accept it when you've been indoctrinated into it.
Tom and Larkin, I wanted to thank you guys for participating in the inaugural venture of our debate format. You guys were both very polite. I'm proud of your performance. Larkin, you did an outstanding job presenting to an empty screen because he doesn't have video to see the studio right now. So when you're watching it,
I'm here yelling at a history icon.
Well, he said how much practice he's had doing that. So
and so Larkin, when you're watching this at home, finally, welcome to the studio.
Then I can see what you look like and stuff. I mean, like, it really looks like.
You're courageous for participating at this early stage. I appreciate your patience as we went through some technical difficulties before we got started. Tom, as always, I want to thank you for suffering the hot lights of the studio and for humoring everyone at home who doesn't understand some of these hypothetical things, because I think through questioning between you and Larkin, agreement on some things is needed for it to be constructive, but disagreement on some of these major points that, need to be fleshed out in the minds of everyone, are there as good food for thought. And I want to thank you for participating once again. And you've been watching History So It Doesn't Repeat. This was the testing of the new debate format. And I'm sure it'll be back, maybe a little bit improved next time. And in the meanwhile, thank you for tuning in and not dropping out.